This classic ghost story takes place in the 80s, when only landline phones existed. Phones with wires in a living room, and maybe one in the bedroom. Location: an old country house in the English countryside. November. A wet, windy autumn evening. In this old country house lived Roland and Alice, a newlywed couple and parents of newborn twins, a boy and a girl, Jacob and Rose. Their new responsibilities and intensive care for the children meant they had little time for each other in recent months. Roland had suggested going out for dinner in a nearby town, a half-hour drive from their home. Their home, or rather estate, was on the edge of a forest, remote, with only a few houses and farms in the area. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Roland opened it and saw his niece, Amy, huddled in her collar. She was wearing a bright yellow raincoat. "That doesn't seem to have helped much." "It's just water," said Amy. She was 15. She wasn't made of sugar. In the living room, her aunt spoke in a whisper. "They just fell asleep. They won't wake up for a while." She pointed to the refrigerator. "Take whatever you want, Amy. You know your way around the kitchen. Thank you so much for babysitting." Amy could use the distraction. Tom had unexpectedly broken up with her last week, and she missed him terribly. Babysitting her niece and nephew meant at least one less evening of staring listlessly out the window, crying at leafless trees. "You look lovely, Auntie," she said, and she meant it. "Wait, and what about me?" said Roland. Alice pinched him. She hugged Amy. "We won't be back later than 11. There's chips and popcorn and emergency pizza in the freezer." Amy waved them off. She had trouble closing the door. The wind howled and drove the rain into the hallway. There she stood, in the middle of the enormous, rustic living room, with deer antlers on the walls, a bear's head, and rusty swords and daggers. The floor was covered with dark carpets, a chandelier hung from the ceiling, and a red carpet runner on the stairs. Upstairs, on the first floor, the children slept. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. She fantasized about how it would have been if she were here with Tom, but she shook the image away. He had been very clear. He was no longer in love. She knew it wouldn't work out, and that she had to accept it. Amy poured some cola and turned on the TV. She crawled under a blanket and flicked through the channels. She stopped at a movie where a murderer had inexplicably managed to escape from a high-security prison. Not bad. Half an hour later, just as the detective explained the escape, suddenly, the phone rang. A loud and cold ring next to the couch on a side table. Amy looked at the phone. She let it ring a few times and then realized she was the only one in the house. At least, the only one who knew how to pick up the receiver of a phone. "The house of Roland and Alice Brown. Amy speaking." There was no response. She only heard a slight rustle and, if she listened closely, soft, regular breathing. "Hello?" Amy looked at the receiver in her hand. She had always found it strange when people who misdialed didn't bother to say so. It can happen, right? She placed the receiver back on the hook, found chips in the kitchen, and was just in time for a scene in a dark interrogation room. Exactly 10 minutes later, as the wind clearly turned into a light storm, the phone rang. Amy turned around. She let the phone ring. 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, and then picked up the receiver. She said nothing. The same regular breathing, then a voice. A man's voice said,
"Check the children."
Amy said nothing. She tried to place the voice, to recognize it, but it was a whisper. There wasn't enough sound in his voice. What did you say?"
Check the children.
Who are you? Why should I? The receiver in her hand suddenly felt cold. She looked from the stairs to the dark landing and listened. Nothing. The children were sleeping. If something were wrong, she would hear it. She walked to the stairs and listened again. Dead, quiet. There was nothing to... Amy rubbed her arms. Who was this? Why was he calling her? She didn't even know how long she let the phone ring, but after 2 minutes she couldn't stand the sound any longer. Hello? A sigh. An impatient exhale.
What's taking you so long?
She tried to recognize the voice. Was it Tom? Trying to play a prank? Trying to make up in some incomprehensible, boyish way? No. She was certain. This wasn't Tom. It was a man. An unknown, impatient man. She bit her teeth and gripped the receiver. Who are you?
There's something terribly wrong with them. With the children.
What are you saying? What is...
Check the children.
Amy stood up. If there was really something wrong with the children, it would be her fault. She was the babysitter and had the responsibility. She walked up the stairs, but halfway. She froze. The man kept calling her, but how could he know if she was going upstairs or not? Amy ran to the front of the house. She squinted her eyes. The view through the window was blurred by the rain. It was pitch dark. She peered outside but saw nothing but long swaying silhouettes, nothing but trees. There was no one. She ran to the other side of the house. No one. But that didn't mean there couldn't be someone hiding. She closed the curtains, locked all the doors, opened a kitchen drawer, and found a large, serrated knife. Then the phone rang. Amy picked up.
Go upstairs, girl. Go upstairs to check the children, and I'll stop bothering you.
She slammed the receiver down and looked at the clock. Not even 9:30. It could be another 2 hours before her uncle and aunt would be home. What restaurant were they going to? Had they said? She didn't know. Thinking had suddenly become incredibly difficult, as if her head was filled with sand. Amy picked up the receiver and immediately put it back down. Without thinking, she dialed 112. A woman answered and asked how she could help. Amy's voice was a whisper and she stumbled over her words, but she was connected. Waterwick Police Station, John Watterson, how can I help you? Amy babbled about her uncle and aunt, the twins, the phone calls. She couldn't imagine that the officer had understood anything from her torrent of words, but the man calmed her. Easy, easy, your name is Amy? Calm down, Amy, please. Don't worry. This kind of harassment has been happening a lot around here lately. Bored teenagers telling you all sorts of things to do. Here's what we'll do. If you get another call, we'll trace it. We'll then pay a visit to the caller. They'll be taken into custody and fined. Their phone will then be disconnected. He paused. How does that sound? Amy felt the pressure of her chest ease. She nodded, realized the officer couldn't see her. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Watterson. John. Call me John, Amy. Now, let's hang up, okay? The sooner you get another call, the faster we can catch the culprit. She hung up. Amy brought the receiver to her ear. The voice sounded untiring, as if a tape was being played, as if you could play this game all night long, until morning came and all the horrors hid from the sun for another day.
This is your last chance, girl. Go upstairs and check the children.
She hung up. She crawled to the window and moved the curtains slightly aside. She frowned and blinked her eyes. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the garden. Nothing. There was no one to be seen. She waited. It felt like an eternity until the silence was broken. Amy, it's John. Listen, forget what I just told you. We've been able to trace the phone call. Amy, you need to get out right now. The call is coming from... For a moment, she thought she was going to faint. Inside the house where you are now. The receiver fell from her hand and clattered onto the tiles. She turned sharply and ran down the hallway to the front door. Locked. She had bolted it. Where were the keys? Where had she put the keys? On the table? Next to the couch? She had to go back into the living room. Her legs felt like rubber, as if she were dreaming. As if this all was a nightmare and she could wake up any moment on the couch by her aunt and uncle who had returned from the restaurant. The keys were not on the table. Where were they? Then she saw the knife. It lay under the curtains by the window, with a keychain next to it. She grabbed them both from the floor and ran back down the hallway to the door. Which key was it? There were 7. How many doors were in this house? Another flash of lightning. A white flash raced over the house. Her hands trembled. The third key didn't fit either, or did it? Yes! With a jerk, Amy turned the lock to the right and pulled the door open. It was pouring. The wind lashed at her face as she ran into the garden, past the conifers and hazel bushes. She followed the gravel path that led to the forest where the pine trees stood close together. Thunder in the distance and another flash. Involuntarily, she looked back and saw what she hadn't seen all evening and couldn't have suspected. A light glow in the children's room. Very faint, but very clear. There was someone in the children's room. Or had been there. The ground had turned to mud, and when a branch whipped against her head, she slipped and hit her head on a rock in the ground. The rain pelted her face, keeping her conscious. A cutting pain slid from her lower leg to her hip. Had she broken something? She tried to stand, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Then she heard a voice. It was more a scream, a voice she had heard before. Oh, Jesus. Amy! She had to stand, get out of here. The deeper she went into the forest, the harder it would be to find her. Amy! A beam of light flashed through the trees, a flashlight. No, not one, several. She pressed her hands to her temples. Amy, is that you? She tried to pull herself up by a rock, and then saw it. Police officers. In the distance, on the west side of the house, she saw the flashing lights of 3 cars. The voice was now so close that she saw the face it belonged to. Amy, I'm John. You're safe now. He knelt down beside her and gently took her in his arms. A second officer draped a blanket over her. With a wide berth, they walked to a car parked further from the country house. John helped her into the car and tried to reassure her by repeating his words, like a mantra. You're safe now. You're safe now. Amy began to cry. She saw she was covered in mud. Her pants were torn and a trail of blood ran down her head. The pain she felt disappeared when she saw 4 officers leading a handcuffed man outside. A man in a white... what was it? Uniform? He resisted fiercely as he was shoved into one of the cars. The car drove away. You're safe, said John. She tried to hold on to the meaning of those words. That night and the day after, and after that, and after that. It was in the newspaper the next day. A deranged patient had escaped from a secure psychiatric facility in a nearby small town. The man had discovered the estate and found his way to the roof via the drain pipe. By forcing a window, he had gained access to the children's room. He had sat there for a while in a rocking chair, contemplating killing the children, suffocating them. Or worse, he could think of 100 things to do to the children. But he knew there would be no resistance and that it would give little satisfaction. He had then listened to the voices in his head. They always had his best interests at heart. He had picked up the phone and called downstairs. He couldn't wait to use the sharp stones he had found in the forest, to do what the voices commanded him, to sacrifice the girl who was downstairs. "You're safe," John had said. Amy's psychiatrists often have to remind her of the officer's words. She has to repeat them often when she has another panic attack. When, for example, she hears an old-fashioned phone ring. "You're safe," the officer had said. To be very honest, Amy doesn't believe that at all.